Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I got a viewer suggestion for a video that I thought would be good to address. And the question they asked specifically had to do with, do I normally choose to go with lighter line or heavier line? And do I have a specific way that I like to make that selection? And there's a lot of different variables to take into account anytime you're choosing what pound test line to use. And what type of line to use, whether it's braid, fluorocarbon, monofilament. But what we're going to address today is the line pound test. Do you go heavier or do you go lighter? And it's not as simple as just, yes, I always go as light as possible, or I always try to go as heavy as possible. There really is some different criteria that you should consider every time you're out choosing what line to use. Today's video is brought to you by the Deep Dive app. This has had an amazing new update. As you guys know, I love the water clarity feature. As you can see right here, we're looking at Grand Lake, which just had a whole pile of rain come into it. It went from being really clear to having a lot of dirty water coming in the bottom end of it. Just an amazing feature to be able to determine where the clear water is versus the muddy water. So Deep Dive has just also introduced stream flow. Now this is a really cool feature that shows all of the water input coming into certain reservoirs and the amount of water coming in. So they measure it in cubic feet per second. You can see in this case, this is just a small creek, but then you can see the projected as well as the previous flows. If we move up the lake here, get into one of the larger rivers coming in, you can see here that we've got 490 cubic feet per second. And then it shows you that there's not much of a change expected. Now, if there's some rainfall coming, I'm sure those projections will change. If we scoot on over here to take a look at Kentucky Lake and Barkley Lake, much larger river systems, the Tennessee River, you can see what the projected outflow is going to be there, 28,000 cubic feet per second. Go check the Cumberland River here. We got 9.4 thousand cubic feet per second. Just an amazing feature that allows you to see all of the different water flows coming into the different parts of the lake. You can see which ones might be the most affected, which ones won't be affected, see what the projected outflow schedules are. A major feature to help you catch more fish. And that's on top of some of the other new features like the wind effects. Now, the wind effects is really cool because we've had wind effects as part of the app in the past, but all it did is show where the wind was hitting the shoreline the most, as you can see from the dots, the orange and bright red dots, which indicate where the wind is really striking. But now the wind feature also indicates what the wave action is like on the lake itself. So some of the features you're going to get from this is determining where to get from place to place safely by avoiding the heavy, rough water conditions. You'll be able to determine where you may have some of the strongest current flow and some of the places where you can fish to stay protected. Now, along with that, you still have some of my favorite features like the patterns that you've got on the lake that indicate the best baits and lures to fish with. You've also got the water inflow app, which shows you where a bunch of the rain input comes in. That can be an amazing pattern to fish throughout the year. Just a great feature to have. So many positive features anytime you're fishing or using the Deep Dive app. Just points you in the right direction to catch more fish. Whether you're a tournament angler or a local fun fisherman that's just out to catch a few fish, the Deep Dive app will help you catch more fish next time you're out on the water. The first thing that you should consider is the bait that you're using. Do you want it to impart a lot of erratic movement? Do you want it to have movement on its own? Because what you need to recognize is if you're choosing, say, 10-pound fluorocarbon versus 20-pound fluorocarbon, you're going to get a lot less movement out of your bait with 20-pound fluorocarbon than you will with, say, 10-pound or 6-pound. The lighter you go, the less resistance there is on your bait. So if your bait is relying on a lot of erratic movement to generate reaction strikes, in my opinion, it's generally better to go with light line. So as an example, what I would say is if you're throwing a crankbait, generally speaking, your crankbait, yes, you want to have good hunting action, but because it's a straight retrieve bait, it doesn't have as much erratic movement based on line pound, the line test that you're choosing. But if you're going with, say, something like a weightless fluke, a weightless fluke will be able to glide further side to side with lighter pound test line. The same thing I would say actually goes into play with a vibrating jig, something like a chatterbait. The lighter the pound test that you go, the better that hunting action will be, because generally with a chatterbait, you're not just straight retrieving it. Yes, it's a straight retrieving bait, but you're popping the rod tip, you're twitching the rod tip, you're stop and go with a handle retrieve. And every time you do that, you're trying to get your bait to dart and have an erratic movement. So if you go with lighter pound tests, you'll actually get better movement out of your vibrating jig. So that's something to consider as well. But what you want to look at is, does the bait require a lot of movement to generate strikes? If you're fishing let's say a topwater bait that's like a chopo, a straight retrieve kind of plopper style bait, you generally don't have to go with light line because that bait's just straight retrieving. When you stop and go, it's not doing anything extra. The bait is making the movement on its own to generate those strikes. So you want to look at it. Do you need to go with light line to get that bait to generate more strikes for you? So that's the first thing I like to look at. The next has to do with how I'm fishing that bait. The rate of fall that I want to have in the water column. Now this varies a little bit based on the type of line that you choose. If you go with fluorocarbon, you need to recognize that heavier fluorocarbon will sink faster and keep your bait down lower. So if you're fishing a topwater bait, I recommend not throwing heavier fluorocarbon line, because your line will sink and actually pull that topwater underwater. If you're throwing something like a Carolina rig and you want your bait to get down and stay on the bottom, what a lot of people do is use fluorocarbon to their leader and then, to a swivel, and then they go with a monofilament line, because the monofilament line tends to want to float. So that'll actually lift your bait from the swivel and the weight on a Carolina rig. But to keep contact with the bottom, a lot of anglers prefer fluorocarbon because it cuts through the water column better and keeps that bait down. So depending on what you're looking for, if you want your bait to stay up higher in the water column or you want your bait to stay down in the water column, I may go with lighter or heavier line in various different types of line as well. So a lot of my line choice goes into play with what am I looking for. If I'm fishing, let's say a swim jig, and I'm actually trying to keep my bait higher up in the water column, I may, if possible, go with a little lighter line, because I do feel like that helps me keep it up. It just kind of comes down to the technique that you're fishing. Another thing to keep in mind is your line pound diameter. So if you go with heavier pound test, you're getting wider, you're getting stiffer, you're getting bigger. So not only is it potentially limiting the movement of your bait, but it also, in my opinion, can become more detectable by the fish. Now, I know a lot of people will say fluorocarbon is invisible, the fish can't see it. I don't know that the fish can't necessarily see it. I think a lot of times when you go with heavier line, the fish can actually sense it. That line cutting through the water column is giving off some water movement, and the fish sense through lateral lines. And from that standpoint, I have a hard time believing the fish can't feel it. I think with braid specifically, where you've got a woven thread, I think the fish can pick that up too, because it's creating a sound and a movement through the water that's just not natural. Now, I would like to believe, and again, I don't have any actual testing that's on this, this is all my personal opinion, but as you go smaller in diameter, you move less water. And if you move less water, not only are you allowing your bait to move more, but you're also making your bait less detectable in terms of it being connected to something that's unusual. So I do personally think that the smaller the line diameter size that you go with, the less detectable it is to the fish, which means you should get more bites from that standpoint. And I don't really care if that's braided line you're talking about. I think if you go with 20-pound braid versus 65-pound braid, you get more bites if you're in a fishing manner. Now, if you're going with something where you have to be using heavy line, or your line really isn't going to come into play when you're in terms of preventing you from getting bites, like frog fishing, I think you could throw a 120-pound braided line and it probably wouldn't get more or less bites than 60-pound braid. But if you're fishing a jig and that line is in the water column and you're actually moving that jig trying to generate strikes, I think you very much will get more bites on 20-pound braid than 65-pound braid. I think the same goes for fishing fluorocarbon and monofilament. You'll get more bites with a jig on 10-pound versus 20-pound. The thing to keep in mind, though, is 20-pound a good line to be fishing if you're fishing in really heavy cover? Should you be throwing 10-pound? Probably not. So you probably want to go with heavier lines. So you want to let the cover that you're fishing dictate as well what line you're going to choose. So if I'm flipping into heavy wood or heavy grass or thick vegetation, or maybe I'm fishing around zebra mussels, I'm going to tend to go up in line size, even though I know it might limit the number of bites I get, because it doesn't do me any good if I can't get the fish out of that structure, or I can't get the fish back to the boat because zebra mussels around dock posts keep breaking my line. So you really need to dictate what line to choose based on the cover that you're fishing. So when you break it all down, it's not simply do I like to go lighter or heavier all of the time, because that's not the case at all. If I had to choose, I would say I generally like to go as light as possible for the scenario that I'm fishing, because I think you will get more bites. But I have to be able to get those fish back to the boat as well. So generally speaking, the rule of thumb is I go as light as possible, but that doesn't mean that I'm going real light in a lot of situations. It could mean I'm dropping from 25-pound to 20-pound. It's just one of those things you want to take into account. And hopefully these different criteria will help you recognize that there are a lot of different aspects that should go into line choice. Not just types of line, but the actual pound test that you should be choosing. Because really, when you break it down, you want your bait to look natural. You want your bait to have the movement that it should have. You want to understand, what is that line going to do to the fall rate of your bait? Is it going to keep it up? Is it going to keep it down? Is the smaller line going to help you generate more bites because it's less detectable? Does the line type or line size even matter in terms of generating those bites? And ultimately, you got to recognize the cover that you're fishing. You don't want to go too light, because if you go too light, you're going to lose potentially the fish of a lifetime. So I hope this answers the viewer question. I think maybe sometimes I overanalyze things, but I also think a lot of times maybe the anglers recognize 3 of the 5 points that I made, but maybe it's those 2 other points that help an angler become better and generate more strikes next time they're out on the water. And that's the whole goal of the channel. Let's catch a few more bass. If we do that, I think we'll realize why we love the sport of fishing. And I'm just trying to help you catch a few more fish. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned, we'll have a new video coming out tomorrow.